We interview analyst Cyrus Janssen about how China is rapidly transforming. Hey everyone, I'm Jason Smith, originally from sunny California, now living in beautiful Beijing. Today with us, we have Cyrus Janssen, a geopolitical analyst and CEO of Fast Forward Marketing, a social media and consulting company helping brands in North America and Asia connect and build successful social media campaigns. Welcome back to the bridge to China, Cyrus Janssen.
Thank you, Jason. It's always a pleasure to be here and enjoy our chats.
I enjoy our chats too. I'm sorry I missed you in Beijing recently. I was just murdering myself for that book, but I'm actually back to being a normal human being again. So next time, definitely dinner is on me.
Sounds great. I look forward to seeing you in Beijing.
Well, you were just back, and it looks like your habit's going to be coming to China this summers. And so I wanted to ask you, when you came back to China this time, did you have any wow moments about China, or was it basically the same? What was your impression of coming back to China?
Jason, I think it's always important for those that are analyzing China to make sure that you make it a habit of coming back at least once a year. Because the thing with China that we know is China has an incredible speed. So we always talk about the China speed. And so I really feel, if you leave for, let's say, 1 or 2 months, you're going to come back and notice the city already starting to transform because things just develop so rapidly in China. So imagine, for example, when I was gone for 4 years during the COVID pandemic, when I wasn't able to get back to China, I had about a 3-4 year gap there. And so the city had, the cities and the country had transformed quite a lot. So I think it's just really great to get back on the ground. Every summer, I bring my family back to China. We base in Guangzhou, and we have a great time. And it's really important for me as a geopolitical analyst to make sure that you're spending time on the ground, especially on a country like China. Now, as far as the differences, I think it's always great to see innovation. I think when you're looking at China, you're looking at the future of the world. I always say that China is inventing the technologies that are going to change the future of our world. My biggest takeaway was actually attending the World AI Conference in Shanghai, which was an incredible event. There were several 100,000 people in attendance. Many of China's biggest firms, biggest tech companies in attendance, really debuting a lot of amazing tech. And it was honestly a really spectacular show. The humanoid robots absolutely stole the show. They were everywhere, all over the convention space, interacting with the guests. They had a boxing match between these humanoid robots, and it's pretty incredible to see where the technology is going. And it's just amazing to see how China's not waiting for the future. China's inventing the future. They're also living in the future. It's a very futuristic way of living in China.
Let's talk about robots for a minute, because in my own personal opinion, and I've said this a few times online. Oh, actually, I want to back up. You mentioned China speed. I say that all the time, and I got that from you a couple years ago, by the way. It's just a very useful phrase to describe China. Yeah, but in terms of robots, do you think that that's something that is going to be really popular in the United States? Would Americans want robots in their home folding their laundry for them?
I think it's going to take time to adapt, but I definitely see a future world where that becomes part of our daily lives. I definitely do. I mean, I think that, if you ask a lot of housewomen in North America, would you like to have a robot that could fold your laundry? I know my wife and I, for example, neither of us are big fans of folding laundry, but we grudgingly do it together. I definitely think that it's going to become more commonplace in China, where I think that more people will be open to adapting that technology. But I mean, think about it. Just a few 10, 15 years ago, none of us had smartphones, right? It was completely it was inconceivable that all of us would have essentially a computer on our phone. Back 15 years ago, we just simply used it to make phone calls, and now we use it for every facet of our life. So yeah, it's going to change.
Yeah, even for gardening, I just ordered some potted soil right before this interview started, and I don't know the Chinese word for potted soil, so I just asked AI on my phone, what's the Chinese word for potting soil? And it told me, and then I ordered it all on my phone. As soon as this interview's over, I'm going outside to get the soil, which will be sitting outside of my door. So it's just an amazing thing. Yeah, technology is very useful. Actually, I see maybe robots useful in elder care, because they're not really particularly good at it now, but maybe in 5 years, and China's going to have a lot of retirees. So yeah, I think that's exciting. So, you traveled around a lot this trip. You were traveling from city to city. Which city or region to you felt the least changed, and which felt more transformed, and why?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, to be honest, I feel I was in Beijing for a couple of days, Shanghai for a couple of days, Nanjing, Guangzhou, of course, and Shenzhen, and then also Hong Kong. So, I mean, to be honest, I would say that which region felt the least change? Maybe Beijing, to me, because but it's also maybe a small data size. I was there, more kind of closer to the Forbidden City, staying at a nice hotel, but I was meeting up with some friends, and I recorded a couple videos there, but I didn't get to really explore too much of the city. So I kind of feel it's a hard question to answer, but I feel I kind of see what the thing that I'm going to take away from this, Jason, is that I feel that China has become really the most convenient place to live in the world. Like you said, you can order something on your phone, and then a couple hours later, it's delivered to your home. It's amazing to see. For example, I was passing by a university, and all of the the students rather, the students at a university, their lunches were just all on the sidewalk. There was just thousands of basically food delivery there. And it was amazing because you just have this amazing sight of food delivery just right there on the street. And that's just a concept that would be so foreign in America. You would never imagine just leaving food outside and nobody stealing the food and then just having this kind of orderly society. I'd say, one of the other things that was really a big change for me that really shocked me is that throughout all the cities is that people would leave their keys to their motorbike in the ignition. And that's a huge change because I remember being in China, let's say back in 2007, 2008. I personally had my motorbike stolen multiple times because that was a very common theft back in the day. Actually, people would steal the bike to really get the battery. So a lot of people would actually take the battery out every night, bring that into the apartment. But the truth is now, China has become so safe, and it's always been safe, but it seems like it's reached another level of safety. Again, I saw multiple women, for example, when they'd go to a coffee shop, they would put their designer bag on the table, to then go up and order a coffee, or someone would put their laptop down. Again, these concepts you would never, ever would you do this in the Western world. I mean, in Europe, it would be snatched within a few seconds. North America, it would be snatched. It's just you have to really regard your personal safety very key. You have to be very aware of your surroundings when you're in these Western countries. That's just the simple reality. And that was something that I wouldn't do that normally in China either. I would always kind of have my guard down, but I was just noticing other people, and I'm like, wow, this is really cool. Like this is just shows you how society has changed. So that's a pretty amazing thing that I was able to observe this summer.
I just wanted to reinforce what you said because I was out last night walking around in the dark. It was like 8 p.m. I was next to a mall, and there were hundreds of motorbikes parked there. A lot of them were delivery bikes. And I noticed from the front side that about 1 in 6 or 1 in 5 motorbikes had their lights on and were just running, And I thought, how peculiar, because it not only is the key in the ignition, but they're advertising which bike is available. And, no one takes anything. It's an amazing feeling, the safety that you experience here. You used to live in Shanghai. You say you're going to be based in Guangzhou now. But you used to be the Shanghai guy. So I was wondering, when you went back to visit Shanghai, did you notice any neighborhoods that you were hyper familiar with? And how did they change, develop?
Yeah, I mean, I went back. I was there just for a really quick visit, actually. So I was just there for maybe about a day and a half. So I was in the French concession, which is the really nice kind of old, part of Shanghai that just has some beautiful streets, beautiful restaurants. I did go to actually that new Louis Vuitton ship that has been really making the rounds. That was pretty impressive. So I actually had a meeting at a mall right behind that. So that was quite interesting. So I was able to see that flagship Louis Vuitton store. And it's for those of you that don't know what I'm talking about, it's essentially this huge cruise ship that they've built, right in the heart of Shanghai, right next to what used to be the world's largest Starbucks. It's directly adjacent to that. And so it's quite it's so Shanghai. Shanghai is definitely the metropolitan, the fashion city, the cosmopolitan. I mean, it is such an advanced, society there, and so it's very Shanghai to have this kind of the glitz and the glamour. So as you can imagine, there were thousands and thousands of tourists, local tourists, international tourists. Everybody wanted to see this, Louis Vuitton boat. And it was just a very nice area. I mean, I remember being in Shanghai when the Starbucks didn't exist, when this mall didn't exist. All of that was just is new. I mean, I remember when it was just a quiet little pedestrian street. Now it's been transformed into a really iconic part of the city. So yeah, I mean, that's changed tremendously. Since just even within the last couple of years.
Yeah, Shanghai has always been that very bougie kind of city.
Yeah.
The new, there's a lot of new infrastructure, a lot of super massive new infrastructure also. So when you were here, what kind of airports or high-speed rail, smart cities did you see while you were around? What surprised you or shocked you the most?
I mean, so when we're back in China, we always base in Guangzhou. That's where my wife's family's from. So, I'm very familiar with the Guangzhou train station, and I would take high-speed rail. So last year I took a high-speed rail from Guangzhou to Chongqing, which is not a short journey. That's, a very, very long journey. It took about 6 hours on the high-speed rail. But I think the thing that always amazes me, Jason, I think especially for international listeners here, is just the convenience and it's the high class. I mean, you can buy a business class ticket in the high-speed train, and you have a fully reclinable seat. It's very spacious. There's not as many seats in business class, but it's very affordable, and I think that's just something that I always enjoy. So I did take a train. I did take a train from Shanghai to Nanjing, so a much shorter journey, but I had a nice business class seat. So, and that was I think when you enjoy traveling in China, everything across the board now is much higher level. For example, back in the day, it would have been, okay, we're going to have one really nice, super high-end train, and it's going to go from Shanghai to Beijing. And the other trains would be a little bit lower class. But now, really, the standard has been raised across the board for all of the trains. And, China's done an amazing job with their train system. So, I mean, that's something that, these are the kind of common themes that I think a lot of people that live in China, we all know and we all enjoy. And it's also one of the things that most foreigners find very interesting about China is just, again, the safety, the cleanliness, the convenience, the high tech, the high-speed rails, which of course we don't have in the U.S. So that, to me, is just a really amazing transformation.
I have another question. It's a little bit different. In Chinese hotels, a 4-star and up, they pretty much have robots to assist people in making deliveries to their rooms now. And oftentimes when I talk about high-tech China or I show high-tech cities in China, people will say, you know what? That's like Las Vegas, and that's their retort for Americans to say, oh, we have stuff like that too. You're based in Las Vegas. Can I ask you, is there similarities, dissimilarities between hotels in China and Las Vegas?
Well, I think the nice thing is when you're in hotels in North America, the standard and the service is not at the same level as Asia. So I would say across the board in Asia, a 5-star hotel in Asia is a much nicer experience than would be a 5-star hotel in North America. I'll give you something as simple as, when I travel to Asia, I never bring any toiletries with me because I know that I'm going to have a razor, I know I'm going to have a toothbrush, I'm going to have combs, I'm going to have basically everything that I need. The only thing I need to bring is deodorant, but everything else I literally don't bring because I know every day I'm going to get a new toothbrush, every day I'm going to have a new comb, every day I'm going to have a fresh new razor and shaving cream for me. And so even at a nice hotel here in Vegas, if you're staying at a nice hotel, they would not have any of these amenities for you. Even a bottle of water is not common amenity in Vegas, wow. Which is ironic because it's in the desert. We've actually this is actually something that we've seen a huge shift. I don't know if you've heard the news, but Vegas right now is down significantly with tourism. There's been a very big drop in tourism. So last month, tourism was down 13%, which is quite a large number. And what's happening is this is actually a fallout from the Trump tariff war because all Canadians, the majority of Canadians are boycotting the U.S. right now. A lot of Europeans did not come for their summer holidays. And quite frankly, what you're seeing in America is we're having a cost of living crisis right now. And the issue is that even for local Americans that are wanting to go travel domestically, Vegas has become too pricey for them. And so as a result of the tourists not coming, there has been a lot of layoffs in Vegas. So in addition to not having good service, you're now getting worse service because, for example, the bellhops, the valet parking, a lot of these people are actually getting laid off. And so, for example, you might be staying at a 4 or 5-star hotel in Vegas and walking your bags to your room because no one else is there to serve you. And if there are somebody there, you might have 1 or 2 people working in a massive hotel with 3,000 rooms. So yeah, good luck trying to get service. So it's an ironic thing is that the prices are going up, the service is going down. That's the on the ground report from Vegas.
Well, that's sad. That makes me really unhappy. However, there's an easy fix. Just make it easier for Chinese tourists to come to the United States, and they will come to Vegas in huge droves because Chinese are the biggest spenders when they travel internationally in the world. So if Chinese were able to get easy visas to travel to the United States, that would be good for diplomacy, but also good for the economy, especially in Vegas, because every time I talk to a Chinese person, they're like, "Oh, I want to go to New York and Vegas," or they say, "Oh, I want to go to Los Angeles and Vegas," or "Oh, I want to go to San Francisco and Vegas." For some reason, Chinese people really love the idea of Vegas, so that could be
absolutely.
it could be a big fix. I wanted to ask you, because I think a lot of people who have never been to China before, when they think of China, they get concerned, oh, how am I going to be received? Especially Americans are like, oh, I'm American. How am I going to be received? Because in the United States, there's this idea that there's a conflict going on. Whereas in China, I think it's a lot less so. So how would you explain to people, how are foreigners received? How did people treat you when you came to China this time?
Well, Jason, I have to be honest. It's the same that I've been treated for all 18 years that I've been traveling to China. So my first visit was 2007. As a Western man, as a Caucasian, quite a tall Caucasian man, I stick out in China. Many people come up to me to ask me, where are you from? As soon as I say I'm from America, I've never had anybody say anything bad. Everybody has been very welcoming. That was the case in 2007. That was the case in 2025. I would say that I've had more people say, you know what? We really like America. We like the country. We don't like your government. And we don't like your president, but we like you. And we're able to distinguish between a president, a government, and its people. And I always joke with them because I say, well, don't worry. There's a lot of Americans that don't like our government and don't like our president either. And so you're not alone. So there's many Americans that would agree with your statement, ironically. So but I think, this is why I feel it's so important when we're talking about how to improve relationship is people-to-people diplomacy. Because if you get an American man with a Chinese man, in a room and they're just talking, they're at the end of the day, we're people. We're all people. And I think this is a point that I always say in my podcast is that Chinese people are no different than Americans. They want the same things in life, right? They want to have a better opportunity for their children. They want to live healthier lives. They want to have some type of business or a job that provides them with stable income. They want stability, and they basically want to go on holidays with their family. And honestly, everything I've just said is no different than the typical American, right? We're all in this world together. We're all trying to have similar goals. And so I think when you really start to realize, hey, Chinese people are much more similar to me than I think. We kind of think of, especially in the United States, we have this stereotype, that in China there's no freedom. In China the government is so oppressive. And actually when you go to China, you realize that people day to day don't talk about the government, right? It's not a common thing to talk about politics. It's not a common thing to talk about a government. Obviously, China's a one-party state, so you don't have that election that happens every 4 years. You don't have the midterm elections that happen every 2 years. You don't have your local Senate things. So it's a different system. But, I have to be honest. I mean, it's exhausting when you're in the United States and you're talking about the elections that are coming up and you talk about politics, because unfortunately I told my friends, I say, I don't really like discussing American politics because we sit here for an hour, we discuss it or we argue or we agree and nothing happens, right? Nothing's going to actually change in our government. And so the best thing that you can do in the United States is find yourself a local community, find yourself a good group of friends, find a way to reduce your taxes as much as possible and just live your life. Try to have as least amount of politics and government in your life as possible, and you'll be a lot happier in America.
Certainly a lot happier. Yeah. You do consultations, so I'm interested in what you think about Chinese emerging tech sectors: tech, green energy, consumer goods, entertainment. What seems to be booming? What did you see this summer? What are you interested in?
Yeah, great question. I mean, for me, I'm always fascinated with the electric vehicles because I would say a big change from 2024 to 25 is I think I've seen an increase in the amount of EVs on the road in China. So I kind of guesstimated that maybe half of the cars in China last year were around, maybe 50% of the cars on the road were EVs. But as I was, there was many times where I was walking along bridges and watching all the cars go by, and I'm like, geez, there's so many of these green plates, which means the new energy vehicle. And I thought, man, I feel it's almost maybe closer to 60% or even maybe more. There's just even more technology. And what I love is I love taking the dicuss, which is your, basically your Uber equivalent. And so Didi is so great because you can really request a very high-end car, again, for a very affordable price. So, and when I mean a high-end car, I mean you're getting, a equivalent of a very, this would be a multiple six-figure Mercedes-like car, but it's a Chinese EV. The driver is wearing white gloves, a nice suit. I mean, they're very well presented. They have bottles of water for you to drink. The luxury is incredible, and it's literally compared to the U.S. on what that would cost you. It's pennies on the dollar. So I mean, it's you can go across town for $10, or something in one of these high-end cars. And so I always enjoy booking those cars and experiencing that, having a great conversation. Even the drivers, they're so well mannered, they're very happy with their job. It's just like, hello, sir, how are you today? Please, fasten your seatbelt for extra safety. If you're thirsty, here's a bottle of water. If you'd like to change the music, let me know, and we'll get you safely to your destination. It's just this amazing service that you get, and a lot of pride, for these guys that are driving these cars. So I love the EVs. I was very interested in AI technology. I wanted to see, all of the robotics and the AI. I mean, it was incredible. I was visiting the Tencent booth at that AI conference, and they had done a partnership with China Southern Airlines. And China Southern Airlines is now using this AI technology to train all of their pilots. So all of their pilots now have to do 1,000 hours of actual flight simulation using this AI simulator before they're able to actually fly an actual plane. And so I'm like, wow, this must be pretty darn good technology if they're requiring pilots to do 1,000 hours in the simulator, and obviously get them prepared to actually fly a real plane. So you kind of see the technology in every facet. I mean, we talked about the robots. It's the similar thing when you're in a hotel and you want to order some takeaway food. It's very easy to just get that delivered, and then all of a sudden you get a little robot ringing your doorbell, and then as soon as you open it, the door on the robot opens. You can just grab your Wai Mai, as we call it, in Chinese, is the takeaway, and there you go. You're living a very convenient life. So again, I just really love the convenience of China. It's just, that's a very common word that you're going to hear, is it's just extremely convenient.
I read a small influencer, just someone with like 1,000 fans on X yesterday, and they had some amazing comments. I was just really enjoying this person's social media platform. And they said, and I thought this was interesting, the future of U.S. industry might be copying Chinese services. What do you think about that?
Well, what's really interesting, Jason, is I think we've seen a tremendous shift in the last 20, 25 years. I'm going to bring you back to 25 years ago, when a lot of people said, hey, the only thing that the Chinese are good at is copying things, or just simply making things. And if we actually go back 25 years ago, that's what China excelled at, right? Like, I need you to, here's a T-shirt. I want you to make this exact same T-shirt. Here's a toy. Make a copy of it. And so the Chinese were very good at copying. It's like, we can replicate. If this is what you want, we can build something exactly like that. And so that's really how China started, as this manufacturing powerhouse. But then what happened over the last, especially the last 10 years specifically, is you started seeing China shift from manufacturer to innovator. And instead of just saying, hey, instead of us just being, your manufacturer, why don't we actually start innovating as well? Let's start pushing the boundary in these industries, and let's start really making a name for ourselves with these homemade Chinese brands. And so now you've seen, for example, I think in 2014, Harvard Business Review had a very famous article that said, why China can't innovate. And then, a few years later, it said, Harvard Business Review is like, why we need to stop the Chinese from innovating. So it's like, it's like this double, it's an oxymoron. It's like within a few years, you've had a complete 180-degree pivot. And the interesting thing is that BYD was actually going to build a factory, for their electric vehicles in Mexico. And then they decided, you know what, that's actually too close to the United States. We are worried that the United States would try to steal that technology. So we're going to actually not build a factory in Mexico because we're worried about the Americans stealing our technology. So again, what a dramatic shift when we look at this timeline of where China was and where it is now. And so I think that's a tremendous thing. But Jason, I had my neighbor who called me today. He's 70 years old, a lovely guy, and he sees a lot of stuff on social media about China, and he just said, Cyrus, I've never been there, but my gosh, it just looks, everything is so futuristic. The electric vehicles are amazing. They have so much stuff that we don't even have here in America. He's like, I still am able to travel. I mean, I might have to go to China just to experience it. And I said, you would probably love it. And I've never talked to anybody personally that's not gone to China and had an experience that really is quite amazing, because it really blows a lot of expectations and a lot of stereotypes out of the water, and it really makes people look at the world in a much different light.
What about companies that are operating in China? I think Marco Rubio and others are worried about the way that American companies are treated in China. What are your thoughts about the presence of foreign businesses in China? Are there more restrictions? Is there more collaboration, more competition? What is your view?
Well, I've never understood that point from the Republican Party right now, where they're, Trump and Donald Trump Jr., Marco Rubio, they're making a point like, it's not fair for American businesses. We're not welcome in China. And that's complete rubbish. I mean, you can go and, you go to China, you see all of the international brands. I mean, let's not forget, you've got, plethora of Apple stores here. You've got many Starbucks. You've got Nike stores. You've got, loads of McDonald's and KFC. I mean, there's more KFCs in China than there are in the United States. So, you have a tremendous influence of American power. I would say soft power. I would say also just American brands that have been in China for decades. This is not something new. It's not like China saying, Nike, you're not allowed to come in here. Nike's been in there for 20 years probably, if not longer. So China's been in, these have become very valuable markets for Western companies. However, I would say that this has started to shift a lot in the last couple of years because, again, with the trade war, with the fallout of U.S.-China relations, there has been a growing trend here, Jason, where we're seeing a lot more Chinese actually embrace local brands, which is a really unique thing. And so you start seeing, like, for example, Li Ning, which is which would be equivalent to like a Nike or an Adidas brand. Li Ning, very famous brand. They have done a tremendous job. Really capturing that domestic market, and I think a lot of Chinese, the younger generation is very patriotic. Jason, when I first went to China 18 years ago, all you wanted was a Nike shirt, right? Chinese people would not buy a Li Ning shirt because it wasn't cool. I want to have that cool Nike swoosh on my shirt, or maybe I can have an Adidas or Under Armour or something like that. I want to have one of these Western brands because it's looked to be superior. But you actually go to Li Ning and you look at their fashion brands and you look at their clothing. It's the same price point as a Nike, so it's not like it's a cheaper version. Their basketball shoes are just as expensive as Nike. They're making high quality product. Interesting enough, since kind of the mid-2000s, we've seen about 50 NBA players sign sneaker deals with Chinese sneakers. So
wow.
that's a tremendous, in the last 15 years, we've seen over 50 players sign, whether it's Anta or, I think 361 is another brand. There's quite a lot of, Li Ning. There's a lot of these brands that are now represented even at the highest level when you're talking professional basketball. Obviously NBA players, certainly the basketball shoe is the most important piece of equipment that they're going to be wearing during a game. So for them to trust Chinese brands, it is definitely shows the quality. Yes, obviously they're getting paid to wear them, but at the end of the day, if you're a professional athlete, you're not going to be putting on inferior products on your feet. So I think it shows a testament to how this industry and how China has developed over the last 10 to 15 years specifically.
I think that's really well said. Just on a side point, I got to go to Anta's headquarters this spring, and they have an entire floor in their warehouse where robots tear the absolute crap out of their shoes that from every angle and every kind of device you could imagine, just beating their shoes up so horribly. And anywhere there's a problem, then that's where they focus their energy on making their shoes better in the next round. I thought it was really quite impressive, actually. How would you say, because, the trade war has gotten quite brutal. The first round of the trade war under the first Trump presidency, I think Sino-U.S. relations really began to slip for the first time in decades, really. But now it got so much worse this year. When you were talking with Chinese people this summer, did they have a sense that did you get a sense from Chinese people that, public sentiment about the U.S. was shifting?
I think I definitely feel that, because I think there's been a lot of, tension, with this. And I think there's I think with the Chinese, the Chinese are very practical, right? China is always, especially when you get down to the local level and you're talking to businessmen, Chinese businessmen are very practical. At the end of the day, what do they want? They want a deal. They want to make money. Right? There's no secret. They want to make deals. They want to make money. Chinese are very savvy businessmen. So a lot of it really has to do with the politics, right? For example, if you support the Communist Party of China, or if you support America's Donald Trump, okay, you know what? That's great. Like, you support your country, I'll support my country, and at the end of the day, I produce this product. Would you like to buy it? Great. This is what the cost is. Let's do a deal. So I think what happens is when you look at the Chinese also have a lot of resolve, and this is really interesting. So when you look at the trade war and you see Donald Trump in the early days, this is like April and May, when he's really threatening this 125% tariff, 200% tariff. A lot of Chinese are very frustrated with that, because it's like, you know what, we have a great opportunity to do business here. And this is obviously trying to deter that, but we also have options. Chinese people are never going to give up. I mean, you look at the Chinese history and what they've been through. Chinese people are very resilient. And so I think Chinese people will say, that's okay. If, the U.S. will eventually come around, because we do know that the United States needs China. And there is some certain trump cards, pun intended, that China holds, which is the critical rare earth minerals. So I think with Chinese people, I remember meeting with a factory owner who just said, you know what, we're going to just give it a month or two. We're not going to panic. We're not going to what are we going to do? Shut down the business, sell the factory, start firing people. We need to scale back. The U.S. is our everything. No, we'll look to other markets. We can diversify to Southeast Asia. We can diversify by selling more to the European Union. I just read an interesting report just today that, for example, in Israel, you look at the top 10 selling electric vehicles in Israel, 9 of the 10 are Chinese. And so actually 50% of the cars being imported in Israel now are coming from China. So, I mean, even a country that you wouldn't necessarily expect to have a close relationship with China, certainly given Israel's very close relationship with the United States, they are getting very interested in Chinese EVs, because it is undeniable. In May this year, I was over in Azerbaijan, over in the Caspian Sea, filming a project over there. Azerbaijan, oil and gas country, extremely wealthy country, petrol for the car, very, very affordable. It's one of the hottest markets for Chinese EVs. BYD, Chang'an, absolutely crushing it in those markets. And I actually had my chance to test drive a BYD car for the first time in Azerbaijan, and it was wonderful. It was a lot of fun.
Wow, that does sound delightful. The Chinese side and the U.S. side got together in Spain just recently. I was wondering, do you have any predictions for Sino-U.S. trade resolution? Are we getting to a point where trade is going to normalize? Is it normalizing? Will it normalize?
Yeah, I have to be honest with you. I find with Donald Trump as president, it's so hard to predict. It actually makes our job as geopolitical analysts very difficult, because, what we can say today on a Tuesday, it could literally flip 180 degrees by tomorrow morning. And that is the nature of Donald Trump. He gave a speech today, on the day that we're recording this. He gave a speech at the United Nations, and he completely flipped on his position on Ukraine. And all of a sudden he said, you know what? Actually, after thinking about things, I think Ukraine could actually win this war, and they could gain back all their territory. And so everyone's like, oh, okay, well, the last 8 months you've been telling us that Ukraine needs to give up territory and that Russia's going to win. Now you've flipped it 180 degrees. And then it's like, well, they could win, but the United States isn't going to get involved. Europe needs to handle that, and we'll just send more weapons to NATO. And the United States isn't really interested in battling anymore, so we're just going to let Europe fight that. So you don't even know how to read that, right? Like it's there's so many random comments, and I think with Trump, he's a very emotional guy, so he's very quick to react. He might say, you know what, we're going to ban all student visas from Chinese people. We don't want Chinese people to come and study at our universities. And of course, then he'll have his advisors say, well, Donald, Chinese students make up a significant amount of tuition in the United States, and quite frankly, a lot of schools would collapse if they don't have that tuition. And then, within a few hours, he would reverse that and say, you know what, actually, we love Chinese students. They should come to America. We have the best universities in the world, so let's welcome them all. So this is the tough thing. I think this is also a very difficult thing for China, because for Chinese people, again, very practical. They're very, they really want to do a deal where they, just talk to me straight. Don't say one thing and then do another. That's a very big thing for Chinese when you're negotiating. And I think that's where, we even saw this in the last presidency with Joe Biden, where he would say, we're going to defend Taiwan. I think Taiwan, one China, this, it's like, well, okay, so do you recognize Taiwan as part of China or do you not? Oh, yes, I do recognize Taiwan as part of China. But we're going to send military weapons to Taiwan. So it's kind of like two answers to the same question. So and then it leaves everybody a little bit confused. So again, I'm very bearish on like a U.S.-China trade deal, because I just think that our current administration in the White House, quite frankly, does not have a lot of experience and really knowledge to handle these overseas relations. We still have not seen a significant trade deal brokered, from this trade war. We've seen agreements, like, for example, the United States and the UK. They essentially signed a document basically saying we're going to cooperate at some point, but there is no actual formal trade thing in place, even with the UK. So again, you can say like, oh, Trump secured a deal, but so much of that is really surface level. So much of it is like, hey, Britain, sign this piece of paper that says we're going to make a deal one day. And then they'll sign it. And then it's like, guess what, guys? I have a deal. It's almost like I want to be able to make a social media post about that. So, and this is, but the problem is, Jason, this is very confusing for business, because a lot of companies in the United States are not giving guidance because, we just don't know. There's so much political uncertainty. There's so much uncertainty with these tariffs. I've had business owners that were importing stuff from China, and it's like, oh my gosh, they're telling me every day the tariff could change. It could be 120%, but Trump might reverse that. Well, my cargo ship is on, my container of products is on a cargo ship. It's going to dock within 7 days. So whenever that, if it's next Tuesday at 10 a.m., that's when it docks. Whatever the tariff rate is that day at that time, that's what you're going to pay. And it's just kind of it's really a lottery. It could be 100%, it could be 10%. You never really know, because everything's changing so fluidly. But that also makes the environment to do really hard for business, and this is why we see the United States entering a recession right now. We see a lot of problems in the United States economy.
Well, that's eloquently put and kind of tragic. I was wondering, in terms of, a lot of people say that China's economy is collapsing. Obviously, most of those people can't be taken seriously. But a lot of serious pundits say things like China's economy is slowing. When you came to China this year, what was your sense about how well people are off? Are they struggling? Are they thriving? What was your outlook?
I think I really want to be objective on this answer here, because I think what's important to understand is that for a long time, there was always a very positive sentiment in China that, next year is going to be better than this year, right? And every year my life is going to keep continuing to get better. I always make this point a really important one. When I went to China in 2007, China's GDP grew 14.4% in 2007. That's phenomenal. Obviously, we understand that that's also unsustainable, right? You can't grow an economy, especially of China's size, by 14%. 2007, China's economy was significantly smaller than it is here in 2025. So again, you had these robust years of double-digit growth, which has now slowed down to about 5%. Now, 5% is still a very good number. That's equivalent to adding like a Thailand-sized economy to China's already very large economy. So yeah, I'll take a Thailand-sized economy every year. That's a great metric. But the key thing here, Jason, is that I think you're starting to see a lot of maturity amongst many markets. For example, we know the housing market certainly has retracted. It's definitely come down, and I think that's where the Chinese government came out and said, Xi Jinping famously said, housing is not for speculating. Housing is for living. I don't want you trying to buy a house just so that you can flip it for a large profit. Again, with that kind of socialist mindset of really looking at the entire community of China, you want to have affordable housing, and you want to make sure that everybody has a place to live. That's certainly a goal, for the Chinese government. So you want to make sure that people aren't just price gouging and running these things up so much. That has certainly changed. You're not buying a house in 2025 in China with the hopes of, oh, you know what, this is going to double within a couple of years. I'm gonna triple or quadruple my money, within 4 to 5 years because the markets are going so crazy. You're not seeing that. I think what you're seeing though is again, there's certain industries when we look at electric vehicles, when we look at artificial intelligence, when we look at these tech industries, renewable energy, all of these sectors are experiencing great growth and they're experiencing a great opportunity. I even seen many actual restaurants, actually when you go out to eat in China, that was one of the things is that there's a tremendous amount of activity in restaurants. And I actually met with an entrepreneur in Guangzhou who had opened 4 restaurants within the last few years, and all of them are very profitable. All of them are doing good. He kind of offers this, I would say like the average entree price or kind of your average meal is going to cost you between 80 to 100 RMB. So it's not cheap, but it's not super expensive. But so it's kind of almost like, the economy's down a little bit, but I can have kind of like an elevated meal for something that's not going to break the budget. And so he actually has a really cool restaurant. It's kind of a Western theme. It's kind of a Western food, Western brunch with a kind of Asian element to it. So it's a very creative menu, very creative coffee menu, which coffee is so popular now, certainly amongst the youth. China is the fastest growing coffee drinking nation in the world. A tremendous amount of beans being sold to China, a tremendous amount of coffee shops throughout the country. So I think there's always opportunities to be found in any market. It's just being patient and knowing what that is. For example, I do a lot of sports consulting as well because given my background, I used to be in the golf industry and in the sports industry. We have multiple golf academies that I visited in China. These are some clients. The coaches are extremely busy. People are taking lessons. People are really doing a really good job. So I think that there's always opportunities, and even a downturn, you just have to work a little bit harder, and that's certainly the case in 2025.
Well, that's very thorough. Did you notice any changes in the way that social media is used in China versus the way that it used to be used? Or what would you say are the trends in social media in China, in your opinion?
I have to be honest. I'm not too up to date on that. I would just say that what's interesting is how common it is for people to use apps to certainly get like discounts and to really research. So you look at something, for example, Xiaohongshu. Xiaohongshu is very popular, which is kind of now the default where, if I'm going to Nanjing and I've never been there before, well, let me pop into Xiaohongshu. Let me see like what's the trending things. Like basically, what are the things that I want to do? What are some good restaurants? What is some good entertainment? What are some of the things that I really shouldn't miss out? Kind of all of the basics that you really need to know. I would say that, Douyin, which is the Chinese version of TikTok, that is certainly still popular. But, Xiaohongshu has become, I would say, a little bit more popular. And even, you have Dianping, which is you can order stuff online and certainly this is where something, for example, my wife really had a lot of fun with this, is where we're trying to look for a restaurant to go to, and she would look for the quan, which is like the discount ticket. And so she's like, hey, if we go to this restaurant, I can apply this quan and we can get a discount here. And so, what's interesting is that you can, there's different specials that are run every night. So, if you're using these apps and you're getting these coupons, it might be, hey, if you come on Tuesday, you're going to be able to enjoy 20% off on this night only. And then maybe that changes every now and then. So you're kind of constantly on the app, always kind of trying to see, what is the up and coming thing, that's really happening. And the other thing that I noticed that was really cool, Jason, is I did notice a lot of pop-up shops. And I think this is kind of an interesting thing because what I've noticed is as we know, retail is a tough business, right? If you have a brick and mortar store, there's a large overhead, right? You have to keep an entire inventory. You need to pay rent, insurance. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of cost involved with that. But what I did see these really successful pop-ups where even in like Beijing, I believe there was a collaboration with Adidas, and what they did is they had this like panda bear kind kind of series. So basically, it was like a panda bear with the Beijing, with the Adidas logo. And what they did is they did this really popular pop-up tent. They were going to have it there for 4 weeks. It was like a limited edition run of clothing, and then all of a sudden you see massive lines because it's trending online. It's trending on these social media, and I thought, that's actually a really brilliant plan because you think about it. If we're gonna, why don't we come up with a unique concept? We'll blow it out on social media. Like, for example, this is an Adidas with a panda bear, collaboration. So you kind of have this cartoon panda bear on an Adidas shirt. It's limited edition. We're only going to make, let's say 10,000 shirts, and we're going to sell them all in Beijing, and we're going to sell them for the next 4 weeks. So you have a very short time frame in order to get that exclusive gear. Once it's gone, it's gone. All of a sudden, it's scarcity, and then now that really pumps up the demand. And so, I think there's always ways, for people to, make money and to always hustle. And so these are kind of some of the things that I certainly seen, while I was in China this summer.
Well, it sounds like you traveled by high-speed rail because you mentioned business class. So I wanted to ask you, did you see a lot of solar or wind installations, green spaces? How's pollution looking? What was your impression about the general environment developing here in China?
Well, Jason, the first thing I'll talk about is the pollution, because this is something that for us China veterans that have really spent a lot of time in the country, we can remember the days of really heavy pollution. I did make a video about this where I said, I remember back in 2007 being in Shanghai, the pollution being so heavy that you could literally not tell what the color of the traffic light. You couldn't tell if it was red or if it was green because the pollution was that thick. I remember those days. I lived through those days. And, those days were not every day. They tended to be a lot worse in the wintertime when it already was kind of generally overcast, cloudy, rainy. Then you add in the pollution. It's kind of this trifecta of just a perfect storm that really makes the conditions very bad. Usually in the summertime, it was always a lot greener, a lot bluer skies, a lot better weather, and that's because the heat brought that in. You didn't have the rainy winters, like you did in Shanghai. But the nice thing is I would say across the board, you can go to any city in China and the pollution has been reduced significantly. And it has an amazing thing, especially in the bigger cities, especially in the Shanghai, Beijing's, Guangzhou, Shenzhen. The pollution is at a really great level where it's comparable, if not better, to many Western countries, which is quite remarkable. In addition to that, I would say, you can see solar panels everywhere. You can see wind turbines everywhere. There's no doubt about it. China is leading the future in all of these renewable energies, and it's something that's remarkable because when you look at electricity generation, actually, there's a really interesting graph I can share it with you that's quite remarkable because you look in the last 10 years, the United States is essentially their energy has basically stayed. It's plateaued. It's basically stayed consistent, and China's energy, production has just skyrocketed. So it's just basically gone on a linear line straight up. And what's incredible about that is when you look at AI. AI requires a tremendous, and I mean a tremendous amount of energy. So, for example, there's a lot of speculation in the United States that the U.S. grid cannot handle this new wave of artificial intelligence. And let's just be honest, AI is not going anywhere. It's only going to become more and more, and I think really we're on just the threshold of the possibilities of AI. I think it's obviously going to continue. It's obviously only going to get bigger and better. So you look at, let's fast forward 10 years. If that electrical grid in the United States stays the same, there is going to be such a massive need for power in the United States, supply and demand. If there's not enough power, but there's a huge supply, a huge demand, then the prices are going to skyrocket. And you're going to see electricity in the United States absolutely skyrocket. Meanwhile, China also wants to be a major player in artificial intelligence, and they have an electrical grid that continues to grow every single year. China just broke ground on the world's largest dam. This is going to be in Tibet. This is going to be an incredible project. It's going to be a tremendous amount of money, but when it's done, it's going to be able to generate as much power as the entire United Kingdom is able to produce. And this is from one dam in the Tibetan plateaus. And so again, it's a tremendous project. I really only believe that a country like China can actually pull it off because, once the Chinese come together and once they want to move forward with the project, they're going to make it happen.
Yeah, you travel with your children, you're with your entire family. I was wondering, in terms of amenities for children, stores for children, toys, places they can go, playgrounds. How do you feel about the infrastructure in China and malls and parks and elsewhere?
I think everything has become so amazing in China as far as for families because there is not as many children being born in China. The China's birth rate is particularly low, no different than many other countries around the world. I mean, especially in Asia. I mean, we look at Japan, Korea, you look at the city like Hong Kong. I mean, even North America, Canada, United States, all of these countries are below 2%. So they don't have a thriving population that are really wanting to have kids now in 2025. That's been a big shift. But what's interesting is that when you go to these shopping malls, for example, they have an amazing amount of indoor playgrounds. And I'm talking incredible indoor playgrounds. We brought our children there. They really love it. There's a place called Miland. So Miland, very popular brand throughout southern China. This is in Shenzhen and Guangzhou. I mean, a huge indoor playground. We're talking ball pits. We're talking little carousel rides. There's a rock climbing wall. There's slides. And I'm talking slides that are going up 3-4 stories. And, you kind of have this whole maze of slides and tunnels and nets, and the kids can play in there. They've got a whole grocery store where you can get a shopping cart and get all of the fake vegetables and pretend that you're checking out. They've got little restaurants in there. You can dress up as a firefighter. They have Lego centers. I mean, it's really impressive. And so it is an amazing thing. I mean, and they're packed. They're absolutely packed. They've got a team of the AIs, basically the older ladies that are just cleaning and sanitizing constantly to make sure that every toy and everything is kept to a high standard. And it's honestly, really good. I mean, the playgrounds are great. I think there's such a high quality of life, I think, that's available in China. And I think this is, it's basically a society that continues to improve. I'm not going to say that it's a utopia. There's still many, dirty parts of the city, or there's still parts that are not as wealthy as others. But this is the thing. By going to China every year, you're going to see noticeable improvements. You're going to see the government working for the people and trying to improve the quality of life. And I think this is the biggest misconception that we have in the West, Jason, because you and I are American, and we have so many Americans. They focus on one thing. Oh, well, in China, you don't get to vote for your president. Well, you know what? You don't. But that's also not a huge priority, because you also have a government and a system that is very localized. Like you're in Beijing, you don't know what's going on in Guangzhou, and the leaders in Guangzhou are focused on one thing: let's make Guangzhou better. Just as your leaders in Beijing are thinking, let's make Beijing better. And so, the leaders out in Tibet, which is a really far place from Beijing or Shanghai or anywhere, they're having to adapt to the local people and the local needs in Tibet. And obviously we look at the Tibetans, they have their own language, their own culture. So it's, how do we get them the infrastructure that they need? How do we get them the roads, the ports, not ports, but the roads and the airports, things like that. So, these are all important things, and I think that's something that I want more people to understand, is that when you go to China, you realize that it's actually a lot more localized than people tend to believe. A lot of people in the West, they think that it's Xi Jinping at the top, he calls all the shots, and everybody in China needs to follow. It's much different than that. And there's actually accountability, and that's the one thing that, ask a Westerner, do your politicians have accountability? You'll never hear somebody say yes, because they don't. They have zero accountability. Their entire goal is to get elected, right? And so that's their, and as soon as they get elected, what's the first thing they do in office? Let's start planning how to stay elected. Let's work on that re-election campaign. So it very much is, you're incentivized to take care of yourself. You work with these lobbies that give you a ton of money so that you vote on certain things. It's a completely different political system. But I think China needs to be studied more from the West, and there needs to be a better observation on how this, society and government actually works.
Actually, I just want to point out, I completely agree with you, but I think you would also agree that maybe local elections are a lot better than national elections in the United States. Like, there's not a lot of accountability among senators and presidents. However, if you live in a small town, I think the local elections work actually really well in America. I think that on that level, they're pretty effective.
And actually, that's what you see in China. So again, like especially in these like rural communities where it's almost like a tribe. And it's almost like we really need to elect a really good leader because we have a very small village. I did read this story that was quite fascinating. It was a village in Western China where they basically all of these communities came together and they said we need to find somebody to be the leader of our respective village, and they had elected a young man in his young 30s, and the main reason was because they felt, well, this guy actually has a plan because he wants to really bring technology in. He really wants to use social media. He really wants to actually kind of transform our village and start bringing more people in here. The older generation, we don't know how to do that. We're basically just farmers. But they said, this is where the world's going, and they actually elected him, this young 30-something-year-old, to kind of be the leader of that respective village in China. And again, this is something that Western people, I don't think they would even imagine is happening in China. But like you said, it's no different than your local elections. If you go to Midwest and you're looking at, who's the county commissioner in this county in Iowa, they probably have a huge role, and they're super popular, and they probably spend a lot of time getting to know the farmers and the community and like, what do we actually need in this community? Oh, the school needs to be refurbished? Okay, well, we're going to actually get government funds and we're going to distribute it to that school because that's one of the biggest schools in the nation, or sorry, in our community, and we need to refurbish it. And so I agree with you, and that's where again I kind of go back to, I'll come full circle here. That's where I say like the United States and China is a lot more similar than different, even in the sense of that local government example. That's a really important point that more people need to understand.
We only have time for a couple more questions, so I'm going to boil it down a little bit. I have to say, as an American, and I don't think I'm being arrogant here, we have the best soft power in the world. I love Chinese movies, but if there's a Hollywood blockbuster coming out, I have to see it. Big TV shows that come out of America, big things happening in Los Angeles, New York. These are global phenomenon. They're not just phenomenon in the United States. In your opinion, do you see Chinese soft power catching up in any field?
I'm going to definitely agree with you that American soft power is tremendous because it is seen around the world, right? If there's a blockbuster hit from Hollywood, I mean, it's popular in Europe, it's popular in Australia, it's popular really everywhere around the world, certainly in North America, obviously. But the key thing with that one, Jason, is the language, right? We know that English is the universal language. Everybody in the world is learning English. If they don't speak it, that's their second language, right? You have to learn to be able to speak English to live in this global economy. Now, I think the key thing with China, they have had some good soft power wins. I'm going to tell you an interesting phenomenon is the Labubu craze, which is from Pop Mart. And I mean, this is a huge soft power win for China because here in Las Vegas, we had a Pop Mart store open up in downtown Summerlin, which is kind of the nice area for the locals, and Americans were camping out 48 hours in advance with their tents in the heat in order to get access to those Labubus. Now, this is a huge trend, and I mean, some people like to laugh at that and be like, who cares? It's this little doll that people put on their purse or whatever. At the end of the day, it's a Chinese brand, and it's something that has been able to really become super, super popular. And so I think that's an amazing thing. So I mean, we have seen some Chinese movies that have done really well in the box office, but they're going to be limited because they don't have that exposure with the English language. So I do see that China. Again, I like to give that example with the 50 NBA basketball players wearing Chinese sneakers. Certainly that's a great example of soft power. I mean that would have been inconceivable around 2000. When Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant were playing. Can you imagine somebody wearing a Chinese sneaker? Like, no way. Nike owned the market, and it's not like Chinese basketball shoes are going to take down Nike. Nike and the Jordan brand is one of the best brands of all time. But it is significant when you start thinking of how many NBA players over the last 15 years have had Chinese sneakers, and again, that's a form of soft power in my opinion. So I think there's really a lot of great things coming from China, a lot of great technology, and I think we just really need to again be open to collaboration, be open to working with China. That's the best thing we can do for the future of our world.
Last question. What's next for Cyrus Janssen?
Well, Jason, we're going to keep continuing our podcast and our YouTube channel. That is the primary focus right now, is just trying to make the best videos we can to help analyze geopolitics around the world. I have a lot of travel. I've been doing a lot of speaking engagements around the world. I just got back from Malaysia where I was speaking at a conference there about the future of the multipolar world and how right now we have the United States and China as the two superpowers. Countries have options. And so that was an amazing time in Malaysia. I've got speaking events lined up, in Europe, in North America already in 2026. We're just going to keep working hard. The big goal, and I'll kind of sum it up with this, is my message is always the same. When the United States and China work together, the entire world wins. It's a motto. It's the cornerstone of my work, and it's just really helping people understand that collaboration is always going to be a much better thing than confrontation. And I want to see these two countries. These are two countries that I love. I love the United States. I love China. I want them both to succeed. And I know just from doing business over the last 20 years with Chinese people and having that experience on the ground in China, I know it's possible.
Always amazing insights into the world, into China and the United States. Thank you so much for your time, Cyrus Janssen.
My pleasure. Thank you, Jason.